Welcome, scumbags, Jedis, and broom kids alike, to Unleashed. And this is a very special Unleashed. It's not like the other special Unleashed, it's double special because we have a special guest star. We are talking to Din. How you doing, Din?
Hey, good, man. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We wanted to have you on because you happen to know quite a bit about Mortis, and you have a lot of cool ideas about Mortis. And the thing with Mortis is a lot of us Star Wars fans can't make heads or tails of it. So when somebody comes along like you who has, both the heads and the tails of Mortis kind of in a good place in their mindset, it's nice to talk to you and kind of get these theories and ideas out there. Because Mortis is just a giant question mark in and of itself. Why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about what you know about the origins of, like, the behind-the-scenes origins of, like, where the story group came up with this sort of idea.
Okay, I would say that this is definitely a result of that. What we could see now on the Saga Blu-ray of all 6 movies that Lucas put out, where there's an Easter egg in there, which is him explaining the Force to his writing group and his whole team in the Clone Wars to write the Mortis trilogy. And in that video, it's about, I think it was called Force Explained, or I can't remember what it's called actually. We get 20 minutes of what I've heard behind the scenes was a 1-hour talk, which is basically a 1-hour sermon of Lucas explaining to his writing team what the Force was so that they could get this right. And you have to realize in context that with what he said about, training Filoni to be his sort of apprentice and to know about this stuff, that would have been what he was doing there, is just making sure that, and this is all recorded in video, just making sure that future generations through Filoni would really have a clear understanding of what the Force was. And then this was the writing team for Mortis. So Mortis is really 3 episodes of explaining in greater detail, maybe with some updated relevance on new ideas, possibly in mythology, spirituality, and even science, since the original trilogy. And it's just in greater detail of all the concepts that had been there since the original movies.
Now, a quick sidebar, because I have that Saga Blu-ray, but I haven't played around with all the features yet, and I actually have not found that Easter egg. So for those of us who haven't found it, how do you track that down? Where is it in the menu? Yeah,
so I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's definitely there. It's in an odd place because, like I said, it's a Clone Wars story meeting, and we could track that down and put it in the show notes or something like that for listeners, or I can get it for you after we're done talking.
Yeah.
It's probably on YouTube as well, actually.
That's true. Somebody's probably posted out there, but we'll put it on the show notes because that's something I want to see now. And too bad we don't have the whole 1-hour discussion.
Yeah. Well, because Filoni said to answer your question fully, and what your intro was, Filoni said on the Season 3 Clone Wars Blu-ray special feature titled Mortis, you don't get anything. It's a feature, but then it's funny because you get 2 minutes of him saying, well, to tell you would be to, like, rob you of your ability to think and create your own explanation. And I think that's always been the point with these kinds of concepts in myth. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I remember as soon as I watched those episodes for the first time, I went right to that featurette because I was like, what did I just see? And it was exactly that. It was Filoni with that trademark grin of his, just being like, I'm not going to explain everything you just saw. I'm like, thanks, Dave. Thank you for that. And the thing about Mortis that just I find so interesting is, okay, those episodes were, I want to say, Season 3 of Clone Wars.
Yep.
And that was a while back now. It's been a minute since Season 3 of Clone Wars. And after that, everything about Mortis, it went dark. We didn't hear about it again. It wasn't, like, mentioned in passing in, like, The Force Awakens anywhere. Nothing until Rebels comes along. The end of Rebels. And gives us this taste of these characters again. And I have here with me a book that came out shortly before Rogue One came out. I think it was like a month before Rogue One came out. It's the Galactic Maps book. And this was my first taste of Mortis after the Clone Wars, and it was this page right here. They did like this nice spread all about.
Oh wow, it's beautiful.
And it doesn't have, again, like a whole crazy bunch of info, but it was the first time anything had acknowledged it, like after Clone Wars and before Rebels did. So I was like, okay, they're reminding us again that this thing exists. So
yeah, if it's in the maps book, it's yeah.
So it's like
the location.
They want us to remember that this is still a thing, and it wasn't just this one-off rhombus floating in the middle of space somewhere. So that got me excited because I was like, okay, I know they're going to address it again, and it turns out they did. Did you have, like, knowing, like, we kind of knew going into it because of the trailers that Rebels was going to show off the Mortis folks again. Did you have, like, any expectations now to, like, learn more or to see more, and did Rebels fulfill that for you?
I did have expectations, especially said that Dave Filoni said way back on in an interview after those episodes. He said that we would get an explanation of Mortis in the Clone Wars. No, not knowing it would be canceled at the time, so there was an intention. He did know where it was going, so we finally got that with Rebels. I was expecting it to not fully answer everything because part of the mystery is part of the power here. Because if you explain everything to the letter, then if you rob people of their ability to determine what it means to them, then I think you take its power away and its purpose. But we had enough clear explanations going on, like clear answers, like the owl we learned in Rebels was basically the daughter. That was confirmed. We got confirmation that the father, son, and daughter and Mortis was a legend that had been passed down through generations that even Sabine knew about. So we got a bunch of confirmations that I was happy with, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was some answers, you're right. They didn't spell it out for us because that would totally screw the pooch when it comes to something like this. But they did give us those nice little juicy bits. I brought up on the show a bunch. I was under the impression that we were going to see Ezra, Kanan, and Ahsoka become the new father, son, and daughter. But what we got was a very different sort of tangent on that, while still kind of keeping parallel with this whole Mortis story. And what I took away from those episodes, more than anything else, what interested me the most was what you just brought up about how that guy that Malcolm McDowell was playing mentioned that these three figures, whoever they are, have appeared in mythology and in folklore and in legend dating back to like the ancient days of the Republic. And that gave me goosebumps when I heard him say that, because I was like, okay, how ancient are we talking? Like, what is going on? The fact that so many people have seen them or know of them besides just Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan, the possibilities there, like, as far as I'm concerned now, they could do an Old Republic movie and the characters in that movie could stumble upon Mortis just the same way that the guys in Clone Wars did. Do you have any sort of hopes or at least theories regarding, like, these three people, these folks who live on this floating piece of geometry? Like, what is their deal?
What is their deal?
Well, it's not a healthy family life they've got going on there. It's not the most pleasant. I don't think they're sending each other Christmas cards on a regular basis.
Their deal is balance. Okay, I'm going to start with a Campbell quote on this one, because it sort of will frame everything that I'm going to talk about, and I think the whole purpose behind all of this. And Campbell says in Hero with a Thousand Faces, which we all know was, the steps to the hero's journey that George Lucas rewrote the script of Star Wars to for his second or third draft, whatever it was. And basically in this book, what I have to convey to people is it's a misconception that it's about the 12 steps. Those are a bit of the focus. The real focus of Campbell in this book is what have the spiritual teachers been saying in myth through the ages everywhere. And his answer, he keeps repeating it, like certain phrases over and over. One would be, okay, and here is the great, Campbell says, and here's the great key to understanding myth and symbol. The two kingdoms are actually one. And the exploration of that dimension, Mortis, either willingly or unwillingly, is the whole sense of the deed of the hero. And in the case of Mortis, we see a metaphor of Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka going there unwillingly. So when he says the two kingdoms are actually one, and he uses that as a catchphrase, actually, which is something that I think poets and spiritual writers and have always done. They have certain things they like to focus on, and they have phrases they repeat over and over. So the two kingdoms are actually one. So when the Father says in Mortis, what happens here will happen in your universe, that is a clear representation of that philosophy, that life on Earth and life in the heavens, or whatever you want to call it, the netherworld of the Force, are actually one. There's no separation. And that's another key concept in all of Star Wars. Since Obi-Wan said, the Force moves through you and it binds the galaxy together, then Yoda went on more about that, and Clone Wars went on more about that, and in Rebels, Kanan's always teaching Ezra how he's one with life and the animals, and that he needs to understand that to truly use the Force. The Force is essentially that everything is one, and you're connecting to that power that is connected to everything. And that's even what Luke is showing Rey in The Last Jedi. So, yeah, the two kingdoms are actually one, Mortis and the real world.
It's like a hive mind of empathy, and you're right. The Mortis ends up being sort of a microcosm of the galaxy at large, because once it's thrown out of balance, stuff gets bad in the real world, and we can see, like, obviously the Clone Wars are not a good thing, but we can see, knowing where the story is going, how dark things get in the galaxy for a long chunk of time. The characters that inhabit this realm, the father, the son, and the daughter, I like to think that they, we saw them die off at the end of those episodes. Spoilers.
Except not completely dead, because the daughter is existing. Yeah.
Exactly. So I like to think that the deaths that we saw was more of a symbol that they were trying to get across to their mortal visitors, to Ahsoka and Obi-Wan and Anakin, and that even though the dagger goes into the father's heart and he's gone, he's still around. He's just, because he represents the balance and everything, he's trying to teach them that needs to be maintained, and that by him being struck down and cast aside, everything's going to go topsy-turvy, which is what ends up happening once Palpatine decides he's going to galactic empire on everybody. I'd be really curious, because Mortis is such a Rorschach test to anybody who goes there. I'd be curious to see what reactions you would get out of other characters, like, say, Darth Sidious finds his way on Mortis. Like, how do you think somebody like him would react to a place like that, and how would it react to him?
Because I see this metaphorically as a representation that the two worlds are one. Actually, it's interesting that in Rebels, that's another answer we get, that this was a line of thinking. I mean, they call the episode A World Between Worlds, and the one before it was Wolves in a Door. So there's a doorway between the two worlds, metaphorically. I think that Palpatine is existing through the sun, in a way. I just don't see that there's a line of separation in the energies of that type of evil in the universe, whether as spirit or manifest physical. They're connected. They're inseparable. So the sun is, to me, in the storytelling, literally all these characters who manifest that energy physically in the universe.
I like that. That's actually that makes a lot of sense. And because it's really like a physical. The whole place is that physical metaphor of it. He kind of showed them. The father showed Anakin basically like, hey, this is gonna happen if you don't smarten up. Like, look what my son is doing. It's gonna be a real thing in your world. And I guess they just didn't catch the hint. Now, I'm a big fan of, like, obviously I like, crazy stuff like this, but I'm a big fan of the visual dictionaries for Star Wars, and they always go all out with them, and Pablo Hidalgo does a beautiful job with the new ones.
And he likes to throw in little clues here and there, Pablo.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's full of little, just like fun little chocolate pieces of goodness is thrown in that you didn't expect. Now, because Rebels is over, I'm really, really, really hoping and praying that we get a nice visual dictionary of Rebels that covers all 4 seasons. And if that was the case, the page about the World Between Worlds, if we do get a page about it, because how the Force Awakens book had no pages about Snoke or Luke because they knew when to keep things on the DL. But if we do get a page about the World Between Worlds in that book, I wonder how much, if any, other pieces of new information they're willing to give out so early in the game, because I feel like that is, like, it's such a new addition to the universe, to the canon, but it's something that I think that they have to walk a very fine line where they can use it again in the future, but they can't overuse it. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I think, and I do think the intention here was, Lucas, if you look at the timeline now, now that we know that he was planning a sequel trilogy while even finishing the Clone Wars, you have to assume ideas he was using in the Clone Wars would somehow relate to what he was planning for the sequel trilogy. I think that's a safe assumption. It's the mind of one creator creating 2 things at once. I always sort of thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool? They could go anywhere with this. Like Luke could die like Gandalf at the end of Return of the King, and like Gandalf goes off to the Grey Havens with Frodo. Sort of Luke and someone could go to the Grey Havens, which would be Mortis, and take their roles in that other realm. I always thought Lucas might be going somewhere like that, though. This is just me trying to find a way he would. In no way do I think that that's what Lucas was planning. I just think the symbolism is very important. The more I read Campbell, the more everything starts to make sense that people like Filoni and Lucas and Rian Johnson are studying the teachers like Campbell, who are just giving us a filter, a great filter, but just a filter nonetheless, of all the teachers and the myths and the spiritualities in the world. Like, if you look at the Father, Son, and Daughter, that's obviously a trinity. There's more than one trilogy in spiritualities in the world. There's in Hinduism. There's Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, which are the gods of creation, destruction, and maintenance of what's created. So that also ties into what happened on Mortis. You had the creation and the destruction. So actually the mural, I'm going off on a tangent, but the mural of Mortis on Lothal is very much like one of the most famous Trinity artworks in the world, which is by a Russian painter called Andrei Rublev in like the 14th century. There's an Eisenstein movie about him called Rublev. And in that icon that's very famous, it's important to note that Byzantine people of the Byzantine Orthodox faith, they view their icons, actually they call them windows to the other world, windows to heaven. So this painting on Lothal is also used as an actual window. By touching the hand gestures, you pass through the window into the other world. And hand gestures are very, if you look at that icon of the Holy Trinity by Rublev, the hand gestures and the way the heads are leaning, they tell the story, and then the daughter's head tilts at one point, and Sabine's pointing this out to Ezra. And then it's interesting that they pass through a circle, and the wolves turn into a circle, because the circle in like Taoism, and also a lot of other spiritualities, modern spiritualists call this the eternal moment, and they use a circle. But in Taoism, it's called Enso, and it really means that time is happening all at once, sort of like how modern science is telling us that time doesn't exist and everything happens all at once. And new spiritual people are trying to understand what this means. If everything's happening all at once, they always use a circle symbol, because that's, there's no beginning and no end. So ultimately, a world between worlds isn't time travel when Ezra goes through a circle. It's really everything's happening all at once, and it's more of a mytho-spiritual metaphor than it is time travel. Big tangent. Sorry.
Well, and just like Mortis itself, you're right. All these little parts of that episode that led to the world between worlds are like a giant melting pot of all these beliefs. Just as Mortis is saying that everything's connected, here's all these beliefs and all these little pieces of symbols from different cultures and different viewpoints and religions that are connected to tell this story. So
I think in greater detail, because Lucas was always sort of blending Western religion with Eastern religions and creating the Force, and it worked perfectly as a globalized myth because he did that. Obi-Wan's like a kind of a cross between whatever, and Yoda, Buddha, Jesus, all those people, and what they were saying, and that's what's happening, just in greater detail with Mortis. They're giving you more to chew on in terms of the poetic, more poetic stanzas, just more rhyming, just going deeper. Ezra's name, Bridger. Always wondered, what's his bridge? What's his bridge? So my original assumption when Rebels came out, he's going to be some kind of bridge between the prequels and the OT.
Yeah,
it turns out he was more of a bridge between the physical world and the spirit world.
Yeah, he was basically Jedi Dr. Doolittle. He found the spirit world through the animals and just was able to connect it through there. And that Mortis painting, man, I remember the first time I saw it, I was just like blown away by how beautiful it looked. The animation of it when it moved. Back in like 2012, when episodes 7, 8, and 9 were first being announced, like at all, I remember being on the phone with my friend, and we were like gushing excitedly. And one of the things I remember telling him, because we didn't know when it was going to take place, and I said like, imagine it's like 100 years after Jedi, and like one character like walks into this big temple, and there's a stained glass window of Luke Skywalker holding a lightsaber. Like, how badass would that be? And we
that is something that Filoni would totally do.
Oh, exactly, yeah. And we got that stained glass look in that mural. Now, the father, son, and daughter, obviously, we've said we could always go back and see like Old Republic stories with them in it, because as Malcolm McDowell told us, they've been around. But what do you think the chances are of seeing those three people, either one of them or all of them, again in this part of the timeline after they've supposedly been killed? Like, what do you think the odds are of like Rey meeting them or something?
I think the odds are pretty good, because the story group and Filoni and all the writers and directors are all working together now, and I think it's pretty much common knowledge now that Filoni's meant to be announcing some new animated show soon, and with the epilogue being Ahsoka, back from the dead, with part of the daughter's Force energy or whatever, however you want to look at it, and Sabine going to look for Ezra Bridger, the Bridger of the two worlds. I think we're in for more, and I hope they could tie it into a character from the sequel trilogy. The only problem with that is that the sequel trilogy is so mainstream and so big that you always sort of have to follow the model of A New Hope, where you make things, you hint at the complexity of the ideas through simple lines of dialogue, like Luke does in Last Jedi, or Obi-Wan in A New Hope, or Yoda in Empire, or even Qui-Gon Jinn. Your focus determines your reality is one of the heaviest, most profound statements in all of Star Wars. In the cartoon, which has a smaller audience, you have room to create episodes for kids, episodes for adults, episodes where you go into this heavier stuff. So I think you just have the freedom to be experimental with these ideas in maybe a smaller show than you do in the movie. So the chances of connecting to a character like Rey, I'm not sure. Although if Lucas was in charge, I would say the chances would have been greater, knowing that he was developing the sequel trilogy and Mortis, sort of the same time.
Yeah, he was, like, from what I saw on those Clone Wars featurettes, he was really pushing the spiritual. So yeah, I think you're right. I think he would.
And he said that that the sequel trilogy he planned to be more esoteric.
Oh,
like there's nothing more esoteric than his ideas in the Mortis trilogy.
Yeah, so he would have. I can't wait for that book to come out. The If I Made 7, 8, and 9 book by George Lucas. I don't know if we'll ever get that. Maybe we'll have to wait 20 years for it. But I can't wait to just hear that what if story. But you're right. Mortis is there's a lot of little nooks and crannies of the Star Wars media that you can use to bring Mortis and the World Between Worlds out into the general public. EA Games, if you're listening, Grand Theft Mortis. Bring it. Make it happen. So that is Unleashed for today. That's some food for thought about just how deep the Mortis rabbit hole goes. And Din is not just the person who knows a hell of a lot about Joseph Campbell and a hell of a lot about Star Wars. He's also a musician. And we are going to show you a little taste of what he has to offer. He's got a song he wrote called Desert Planet by the band F105. And Din, this is your baby. Do you want to talk a little bit about this before we show it, or should we just get right
into it? I would love to. I would love to.
Go for it.
I first, I have a blog. I hope we can link to that too, about all this Mortis stuff that we're talking about. Here's a Campbell quote I wanted to end with that I think is another one that perfectly sums up what's going on in Mortis. And so it is that the cosmic symbols are presented in a spirit of thought-bewildering, sublime paradox. The kingdom of God is within, yet without. And I think when people go, is Mortis real? Isn't it real? Is it out there in space? Or is it inside? I think the writers have meticulously studied this stuff and said, we're putting that quote of Campbell on screen, like within and without. They fall asleep, and they go within, and that's where they find Mortis. And once they're within there, it's a waste. That is one. I just want to say to people, thinking about Mortis, when you hear lines in any of these episodes, like when they see the spirit of Qui-Gon and Mortis, and Obi-Wan doesn't understand, and that's how Qui-Gon says, "I am here because you are here." And then at another point, the father says that they're manifestations of the life energy around them. So everything's connected. So Obi-Wan being close to Qui-Gon, he's going to be more connected to the spirit of Qui-Gon. And that spirit is going to manifest quicker in Mortis because it's stronger in the Force there. But Desert Planet, how does that tie into Desert Planet? Desert Planet, the writing of the lyrics really followed, what I was doing with my earlier Star Wars-y songs, like the Rebel Force Radio song, and this Desert Planet goes into that hero's journey more, but on a deeper, not deeper, but maybe a little more thoughtful, mythic, spiritual kind of level, poetic level. So Desert Planet is really about the experience and the metaphor of what the cave is and the desert is. And the cave and desert are both sort of the same in this type of storytelling, which is when you're stripped of everything you have, when there's nothing around you but sand or the darkness, then all you can see is who you really are on the inside. That's the only place you can look when there's nothing else around. So that's Desert Planet. And
that's
thank
awesome.
you for playing it. And it's great to talk to you. I wish we could talk about this for a few more hours.
I know, right? Like, there's so like, and look how little of Mortis there is in the grand overall scheme of everything Star Wars. But look how much we can talk about it. That just goes to show, like, there's so much to be said about every pocket of this galaxy, and we'll definitely have more videos about it. You know, the more we learn, and we'd be more than happy to have you on when that happens, so we can dig deeper.
I would love to. Thanks.
No problem, man. So that has been Unleashed. You've been listening to Din, and I'm Andrew Fantasia, your fourth favorite Rebel Scum podcast person. And this is Desert Planet by F105. Enjoy, scumbags, and may the force of others be with y'all.
Hey scumbags, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on our video. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Rebel Scum Podcast, for all the latest videos.